What happens when a man known for his powerful presence, his intense roles, and his no-nonsense personality sits across from a host who has spent decades asking the questions no one else dares to ask? No one in the studio expected this interview to become one of the most uncomfortable moments on daytime television, but sometimes tension doesn't start with shouting. Sometimes it starts with a simple question. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to The Truth Narrator, like this video, and comment below, because this story only gets more intense from here. Russell Crowe walked onto the set calm, confident, and completely in control. He waved to the audience, shook hands, and sat down across from Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi smiled the way she always does, calm, experienced, and observant. She had interviewed presidents, actors, activists, and people in the middle of public scandals. Very little surprised her anymore. But she knew personality when she saw it, and Russell Crowe had a strong one. The audience clapped as they sat across from each other, two very strong personalities at one table. At first, everything felt normal. "Russell, it's good to have you here," Whoopi said, smiling politely. "You've played warriors, leaders, outcasts, you're known for very strong characters. Do you choose those roles, or do those roles choose you?" Russell smiled slightly. "I think it's a bit of both," he said. "Sometimes you find a character you understand. And sometimes you find a character that understands you." The audience nodded, enjoying the answer. It sounded thoughtful, intelligent, safe. But Whoopi didn't become famous for asking safe questions. "You've also been known," Whoopi continued, "as someone who speaks his mind. Sometimes very directly. Sometimes that gets you into trouble. Do you think that's fair?" There was a very small shift in Russell's expression. Very small. Most people wouldn't notice it. But Whoopi noticed. She watched people for a living. "I think," Russell said calmly, "that people often confuse honesty with trouble." The audience made a soft sound, not quite laughter, not quite surprise. Whoopi smiled slightly, but she didn't move on. "That's an interesting way to put it," she said. "But honesty depends on timing too, doesn't it? There are things you can say, and things you should say, and they're not always the same." Russell leaned back slightly in his chair. "That sounds like a very polite way of saying people should be careful with the truth," he replied. Whoopi didn't smile this time. "No," she said calmly. "It's a polite way of saying that words have consequences." There it was. The first real moment. Not an argument. Not yet. But the air had changed. The audience could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand why. Russell nodded slowly. "Everything has consequences," he said. "Silence has consequences too. People just don't talk about those." A few people in the audience clapped quietly. Whoopi noticed again. She always noticed how the audience reacted. She knew when a conversation was starting to turn into something bigger than a normal interview. "So let me ask you this," Whoopi said, leaning slightly forward. "Do you think being a public figure gives you a responsibility to be careful with what you say?" Russell looked at her for a moment before answering. "I think being a public figure gives people a microphone," he said. "What they choose to say with that microphone is up to them." "That sounds like you don't believe in responsibility," Whoopi replied quickly. "I didn't say that," Russell said. "I believe in responsibility. I just don't believe in pretending." The audience reacted again, louder this time. Some clapped. Some looked surprised. Whoopi remained completely calm, but now she was watching him very carefully. "Pretending," she repeated. "Yes," Russell said. "Pretending to agree when you don't. Pretending to stay quiet when you should speak. Pretending to be someone you're not because people might get upset." Whoopi crossed her hands on the table. "Or," she said, "pretending that every opinion needs to be said out loud." The audience went very quiet at that line. That one landed directly. Russell smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized this interview was not going to be simple. "Do you think some opinions should stay hidden?" he asked. I think some opinions should be thought about very carefully before they are said on television, Whoopi replied. There was a pause. A long pause. The kind of pause where both people are smiling, but neither of them is relaxed anymore. Russell leaned slightly forward now. So the problem is not honesty, he said. The problem is honesty in public. Whoopi didn't look away. The problem, she said calmly, is that public honesty can affect millions of people. And that makes it different from private honesty. The audience was completely silent now. No one was eating popcorn anymore. No one was whispering. Everyone was watching. Russell nodded slowly. So what you're really saying, he said, is that the truth is dangerous. Whoopi replied immediately. No, she said. I'm saying the truth is powerful. And power is dangerous in the wrong hands. That sentence changed everything. You could feel it in the room. The conversation was no longer friendly. It was no longer promotional. It had become a debate, calm, polite, but very real. Russell looked at her, and for the first time, his voice lost a little bit of its warmth. And who decides, he asked, which hands are the wrong hands? The audience reacted loudly, some gasps, some claps, some people just staring with wide eyes. Whoopi didn't answer immediately this time. She looked at him, studying his face, and then she said something that made the entire studio go quiet. The public decides, she said. And sometimes, the public turns very quickly. Russell leaned back in his chair again, but now his expression was different. More serious. More guarded. And that, he said quietly, is exactly the problem. The audience didn't clap this time. They didn't react at all. Because everyone in the room could feel it now. This interview was no longer just an interview. It was turning into a confrontation. And it was only just beginning. The tension didn't explode all at once. It built slowly, like a storm forming in the distance. The audience could feel that something had changed between Russell Crowe and Whoopi Goldberg. The smiles were still there, the voices were still calm, but the air in the room felt heavier now. Whoopi looked at Russell and asked, "You've been in this industry a long time. You've seen how fast public opinion can change. One day people love you, the next day they don't. How do you deal with that?" Russell nodded slowly. You learn very quickly that public opinion is not the same thing as truth, he said. It's loud. Sometimes very loud. But loud doesn't always mean right. Some people in the audience clapped, others stayed quiet. Whoopi leaned slightly forward. That loud you're talking about, she said, those are people. Their opinions matter. I didn't say they don't matter, Russell replied calmly. I said when everything becomes loud, truth sometimes gets lost. The audience murmured. The conversation was no longer light. It was turning into something deeper. Whoopi tapped the table lightly. Or maybe what you call truth is just your opinion, she said. And you don't like when people disagree. Russell gave a small smile. Disagreement is normal, he said. But these days, disagreement is treated like something dangerous. That line made the audience react loudly. Whoopi noticed the reaction but stayed calm. Words have impact, she said. When you're famous, people listen to you. That's a responsibility. Responsibility goes both ways, Russell replied. People should also think for themselves, not just follow whatever the loudest voice says. Now the audience was divided, some clapping, some completely silent. Whoopi asked another question, more personal this time. Do you think you've ever said something publicly that you regretted? Russell paused for a moment. Yes, he said. I'm human. I've said things in anger. I've made mistakes. The audience relaxed a little, but Whoopi didn't stop. And when that happens, she asked, does the public have the right to judge you? They have the right to an opinion, Russell said. But judgment and opinion are not the same thing. An opinion is, I don't like what you said. Judgment is, you are a bad person because of what you said. That's different. The audience went quiet again. Whoopi looked at him carefully. So you think people judge too quickly? Yes, Russell said. And I think the media likes simple stories. Heroes and villains. But real people are more complicated than that. Whoopi held his gaze and then asked slowly, and which one did they make you? The hero, or the villain? Russell looked straight at her, his expression now completely serious. That, he said quietly, depends on who's telling the story. The audience went completely silent. Because now the interview wasn't just tense. It had become personal. The silence after that question felt heavier than anything that had been said before. You could feel the shift in the room. This was no longer just a conversation about media or public opinion. Now it felt personal. Very personal. Russell Crowe sat still for a moment, his hands folded, his expression serious, while Whoopi Goldberg watched him carefully, like she was trying to read what he was thinking before he said it. Depends on who's telling the story, Whoopi repeated quietly. That sounds like someone who feels misunderstood. Russell gave a small nod. I think everyone is misunderstood if you reduce their life to headlines, he said. A headline can't explain a person. It can only label them. The audience listened quietly. No one was clapping now. They were just watching. Whoopi leaned forward slightly. But headlines don't come from nowhere, she said. They come from things people say, things people do. At some point, a person has to take responsibility for the image that follows them. Russell's jaw tightened just a little. Responsibility, yes, he said. But not control. Those are two different things. I can be responsible for what I say, but I can't control how someone else twists it, edits it, or turns it into something bigger than it was. That line hit hard. A few people in the audience clapped, but it was quieter now, more careful. People were choosing sides in their heads. Whoopi didn't clap. She didn't smile. She just asked another question. So you think you've been treated unfairly? Russell paused before answering. I think, he said slowly, that once the media decides who you are, it's very hard to change that story. Even if it's incomplete. Even if it's wrong. Whoopi nodded slightly. But you've had a very successful career, she said. Awards, major films, respect in the industry. That doesn't sound like someone the world treated badly. Russell looked at her and gave a small, tired smile. Success and misunderstanding can exist at the same time, he said. People see the awards, the movies, the red carpets. They don't see the other part. The pressure. The mistakes. The days you wish you had said something differently. The days you wish you had stayed quiet. The audience was completely silent again. The conversation had slowed down, but it had become much deeper. Whoopi's voice became a little softer now. Do you think fame changes people? She asked. Russell shook his head slightly. No, he said. I think fame reveals people. If you're calm, it shows you're calm. If you're angry, it shows you're angry. If you're insecure, it shows that too. Fame just puts a spotlight on whatever is already there. Whoopi nodded. And what did it reveal about you? Russell didn't answer immediately this time. He looked down for a moment, then back up. It revealed that I'm not very good at pretending, he said. A few people in the audience laughed quietly, but the tension was still there. Whoopi gave a small smile. That can be a good thing, she said. But it can also be a dangerous thing in this industry. Yes, Russell said. I've learned that. There was a pause. Then Whoopi asked the question that changed the mood again. Do you think your honesty has hurt your career? She asked. The audience reacted immediately, some gasps, some whispers. That was a very direct question. Russell looked at her for a long moment before answering. Yes, he said. I think it probably has. The audience went very quiet. But, he continued, I also think pretending would have hurt me more. Whoopi tilted her head slightly. Hurt you how? Russell leaned forward now, his voice lower, more serious than at any point in the interview so far. Because when you pretend for too long, he said, you stop recognizing yourself. And I would rather have a complicated career than lose who I am. That line hit the room hard. The audience clapped, not loudly, but seriously. Like they understood what he meant. Whoopi let the applause finish, then she asked one last question, very slowly. So if you had the chance, she said, to go back and change the things you said, the moments that caused controversy, the moments that made headlines, would you change them? Russell looked at the table, then at the audience, then back at Whoopi. There was a long pause. A very long pause. And then he said, quietly, some of them, yes. The audience didn't move. But not all of them, he continued. Because some of those moments, the ones people criticized the most, those were the moments I was telling the truth as I saw it. Whoopi didn't interrupt him this time. She just listened. And the strange thing about truth, Russell said, is that people always say they want it. But when they hear it, they don't always like it. The audience was completely silent again. Whoopi looked at him carefully and then said something very quietly, but very directly. Or maybe, she said, what people want is kindness. Not just truth. Russell looked at her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Because that question, truth or kindness, was not a small question. And everyone in the room knew it. Something was about to happen. You could feel it. For a few seconds after that last question, the studio was completely silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone is waiting for something to happen. Russell Crowe looked at Whoopi Goldberg, and you could see that he was thinking very carefully about what to say next. Kindness matters, Russell said finally, his voice calm but serious. It really does. But kindness and honesty are not enemies. The problem is, people think you have to choose one or the other. Whoopi didn't interrupt. She just listened. I think, Russell continued, real kindness is being honest with someone, but not trying to destroy them with that honesty. And real honesty is telling the truth, but not forgetting that there's a human being on the other side. The audience was very quiet now. This didn't feel like a normal TV interview anymore. It felt like two people having a very real conversation in front of millions of people. Whoopi nodded slowly. That sounds good in theory, she said. But in reality, when you say something controversial, when people get hurt, when headlines explode, theory doesn't matter anymore. Consequences do. Russell leaned back slightly, then nodded. You're right, he said. Consequences are real. I've lived with them. But sometimes the consequences don't match the mistake. Sometimes the punishment becomes bigger than the crime. The audience reacted quietly, some claps, some murmurs. Whoopi looked at him carefully. You really believe that, she said. Yes, Russell replied. Because I've seen how fast the world can turn on someone. 1 week you're respected, the next week you're a headline. And once people decide who you are, it's very hard to change their minds. Whoopi folded her hands on the table. So what should happen when someone says something wrong? She asked. Nothing? No reaction? No accountability? I didn't say that, Russell replied. Accountability is important. But accountability should lead to learning, not permanent hatred. People should be allowed to make a mistake, learn, and move forward. Not be punished forever. The audience clapped louder this time. The room felt divided, but very focused. Whoopi looked at the audience, then back at Russell. You know this conversation is going to be talked about, she said. People are going to take pieces of what we said, post them online, argue about them, pick sides. Russell gave a small smile. That's the world now, he said. Short clips. Big opinions. Very little patience. Does that bother you? Whoopi asked. Russell thought for a moment. It used to, he said. Now I just try to make sure that when I speak, I can live with what I said later. Even if people don't like it. There was a pause. Then Whoopi asked one final question. And if people watching right now misunderstand you, she asked. If tomorrow the headlines say something you didn't mean? Russell looked at her, then at the audience, and then he said something very quietly. Then that will be another story someone tells about me, he said. But at least it won't be a story where I was pretending. The audience didn't clap immediately. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then slowly, people started clapping. Not loud, not like a showbiz applause. It sounded more like respect. Whoopi nodded slowly. Well, she said, whether people agree with you or not, this has been a very honest conversation. Yes, Russell said. It has. They shook hands, but the tension never fully disappeared. It wasn't a happy TV moment. It wasn't a funny interview. It was something else, something more serious. And that's why, later that night, clips from the interview started appearing all over the internet. Short clips with dramatic titles. People on social media started arguing. Some people said Russell Crowe was right. Some people said Whoopi Goldberg was right. Some people said both of them were right. And of course, some people said both of them were wrong. Headlines started appearing the next morning. Some praised the interview for being honest and intelligent. Others said it was uncomfortable and too tense for daytime television. Media websites wrote articles about the awkward moments. Social media pages posted the most intense parts of the conversation. Everyone was choosing a side. But the interesting thing was this: if you watched the full conversation from beginning to end, it didn't look like a fight. It looked like something much rarer. It looked like two people who disagreed, but still listened to each other. And in a world where everyone is shouting and no one is listening, that might be the most shocking thing of all. So now the question is not what happened in that studio. The real question is what you think. Do you think Russell Crowe was right? Do you think Whoopi Goldberg was right? Or do you think the truth is somewhere in the middle? Write your opinion in the comments. And if you enjoy dramatic, intense, cinematic stories like this one, subscribe to The Truth Narrator for more stories about celebrity interviews, public confrontations, and the moments that happen when the cameras don't cut away.